From the 2013 Spring Roundup, Rick LaPlante, leading versus managing.
So, for all of you that don't know, this is Rick LaPlante, and he is here today to talk to us about leading versus managing. And he is the owner of the Triple L Cattle Company here in Powell. And from there, I'll just let him take over.
All right, thank you. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I see some familiar faces out here. My name is Rick LaPlante, and today we're going to talk about the difference between leading and managing. And we could spend the next hour on this slide. We won't, I hope, but we could. So my style is very interactive. I think you guys will get a lot more out of it, and I'll certainly be able to tailor this conversation to you if you give me a lot of feedback. So the first thing I'll ask is, does anybody think they're different? Or does anybody think, who thinks they're the same? Nobody. Then I'm going to assume that everyone thinks they're different. To warm our hands up, who thinks they're different? Okay, there's some people who are not sure yet. Fair enough, that's why you're here. If they are different, if they're two different things, then what does the versus mean? Why are they, versus means against, conflict. What's in conflict between these two things? This is the interactive part. Anybody? What's in conflict between leading and managing? How about time? Is time a conflict between the two of them? Yeah, you spend your time doing one or the other.
I was going to say I view leadership as going in front and management pushing from behind.
Okay, sometimes leadership is being out front and management is pushing from behind. Okay, yeah. There are a lot of things in conflict. Where you spend your time is probably the primary one. If you spend all of your time managing the operation, do you have a lot of time to lead the operation? Not usually. So we're going to talk about today the differences between these two. And then we're going to kind of drill in. And what this presentation started from is I developed a really simple model for analyzing your leadership strengths and weaknesses. And so I'm going to present that model for you, and I'm going to talk about how to use it. And when you leave here today, you're going to be able to decide where you think you need to grow your leadership skills in a very specific way. Because, sometimes we say, I want to be a better leader. Who thinks that's actionable? I want to be a better leader. Generally not actionable, right? So what I'm going to try and do today is give you a little bit more, that next level down, where you can actually say, I need to be a better business leader, or I need to be a better organizational leader. So we're going to talk about those things and what that might look like. Very important that if you have questions, if we get through 2 slides, that's fine, because I want to make sure that at least for those 2 slides, everyone has a real good understanding of what's on them. So please feel free to jump in. So if we're going to talk about management and leadership, we probably need some definitions. And since this is my slide deck, we're going to use my definitions. Probably one of the best definitions I have ever seen comes from the Harvard Business Review. And it says, leaders create effective change. Managers control complexity. Okay, think about that for a minute. So when you are talking about doing something fundamentally different, you are going to require your leadership skills. When you are thinking about how do we do what we do better, we manage that complexity more efficiently, then we are basically using our management skills. Can everybody live with that? Okay, so think about it that way. So I think about management, sort of break that down a little more. Management is the effective coordination and organization of activities. What are we doing today? What are we doing next week? It doesn't matter if you're talking about agriculture or a billion-dollar software company, right? Management is about organizing activities, organizing resources. By the way, these slides will be available up on the website. You are free, so you don't have to write everything down they say. You are welcome to take them, copy them, use them, start a fire with them. So activities, resources, and information flow. So that's what great management is. The just-in-time application of resources, activities, and information flow. So you think about it. When you go to school and you take a management class, what are they going to teach you? There's a very specific set of skills they're going to teach you. They're going to teach you things like prioritization. Why is that important for a manager? Anybody? Why is prioritization important?
What has to be done now, what has to be done later.
Yeah, thoughtful prioritization keeps you out of that. If you went and saw Dallas's talk earlier, it keeps you out of that urgent but unimportant, because it just caught me by surprise. Right? Prioritization lets you think through some of those things. You're going to learn about communication, because in order to effectively align resources and activities, you've got to be able to communicate with people. You're going to learn decision making and coaching and delegation, because these are activities you're going to try and get somebody else to do, right? You're sitting on the ranch and you're like, well, I can't do everything. Delegation is a management skill. Management is, if you think about it this way, management is value sustaining. And what I mean by that is, you can be very good at management and you can keep all the value that your system, your business, your strategy has. Or you can be very bad at management and you can lose that value. Right? So it's sustaining, it allows you to get the best out of the system that you currently have. Leadership is something very, very different. And this is where I think people get very confused. Leadership is, and this is the simplest test I ever have, it is you are creating a reality that would not exist had you not taken action. That's leading. Okay, so let me give you some what isn't leading. I like to use my analogies of, so if I'm out and I'm out front and I'm leading a group of people across the street and they were going to cross the street anyway, was I leading them? Who thinks I was leading them? No. I was physically out front, right? That's about the best you could say. When people are going to go there anyway, when it is obvious, in other words, is the test we use, when it's obvious, you're not really leading. And so sometimes some of our, I guess, least favorite, but sometimes most celebrated leaders do that. They wait until it's obvious where we need to go. They jump out in front and they say, I'm leading, right? That is not leading. That is being out in front. Similarly, if you think you're leading and you are out there and you're walking along and you stop and you turn around and no one is behind you, are you leading?
Not successful.
Yeah, no, you're out for a walk. You may think you're leading, but you're just out for a walk. So leading is about creating a future, bringing people along to this future that wouldn't have happened without you. Okay? And that takes a totally different set of skills. We're not talking about delegation and communication. Now we're talking about vision. Right? Because part of leading is this future, being able to describe this future, imagining this future that doesn't exist yet. And some of the best leaders I've ever seen are people who are, when we say visionary, they are capable of seeing past the constraints in the day-to-day and saying, this is a really good place to be. And then, how do we get there? But they are visionary. So they have vision and insight, strategic thinking. So if you take leadership classes, we're going to talk about competitive analysis and strategic thinking and objectives and how we set those things. Very different from how do we do resource balancing, prioritization, and communication. Leadership is value creating or destroying, by the way. But generally, leadership is value creating. In other words, this is the thing that says we have an existing system, we're managing it well, but we need to do something more, different, and that is the act of leadership. So does that make sense? This is a real important distinction because we're going to start talking about leadership, and I don't want anybody to just sort of fall into that management model. So before we move on, can everybody live with my definitions of management and leadership? Okay, no one's leaving or throwing a fit, so we're going to call it good. Why is it so damn hard to lead? Who thinks it's easy? I should have started. Who thinks it's easy to lead? Anybody? It is hard to lead, and there are many reasons. And so I want you to think about these things before we jump into what it is that you ought to be doing. Let me give you the cautionary tale of why it is so hard. The first thing is, and there's this wonderful book. If you read one book on leadership, you should read this. It's called Leadership on the Line, Heifetz and Linsky. And they have this fantastic quote, and it goes like this. It says, "To lead is to live dangerously." Isn't this like dun dun dun, right? To lead is to live dangerously. Because when leadership counts, now this is not the, oh, everybody's ready to go across the street, I jump in front of them. But when leadership counts, when you lead people through difficult change, okay? Now listen what you do. You challenge what people hold dear. Their daily habits, tools, loyalties, their way of thinking. Okay? This is the bar. You are challenging their ways of thinking with nothing more to offer than a possibility. Think about that for a minute. You can't guarantee them that this thing we're going to do is successful, can you? No. Because if you could, it would therefore likely be obvious, and therefore likely they would be doing it in the first place. You cannot guarantee that where you want to go is going to be successful. So let's take agriculture, which is where I spend most of my life these days. And I do a lot of consulting in large agricultural operations. The most difficult dynamic to overcome is, but that's the way my dad did it. It is the most difficult obstacle to overcome. And that's the way my grandfather did it. And what it is you are challenging their way, not just their way of thinking, but their heritage. And in some ways, the integrity of their father or grandfather. That's the way some people interpret this. Well, that's maybe not the right way now. So think about that. The bar for leading is not low. It is very high. You are challenging the way that they think, their tools, habits, with nothing more to offer than a possibility. So that's a pretty tough bar. You're out there. There's a lot of books. One's called Naked Leadership. It actually is not about being naked, of course. It's about being out there. And the best leaders are people who are out there and you know exactly where they stand. And they have nothing to hide behind. Okay? So that's hard. But then it's worse because, you know, doggone it, other people get in the way of you leading, don't they? Who's ever tried to do something, leading, some sort of leadership, big or small, grand or minuscule, where it would have worked had the other people just gotten in line? Anybody? Anybody had that experience? I suspect if you've ever tried to lead, you've run into that. So other people get in the way. Other organizations. Any of you work for the government? Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I mean, I gave a leadership talk the other night, and there was a gentleman there from the FAA. And they talked about, and he was talking about this project where they were trying to upgrade control tower doodads in airports. And he said, you know, we were leading this project, but the definition of success was written by the FAA, and the definition of how it was going to be done was written by the National Geologist Service, some other organization, because it was about how to figure out where the plane is in relative to the ground. And he said, it's impossible. Because those two organizations get in the way. Their organizational memory, their organizational strife, right? That will happen to you constantly. Think about family businesses. I left Microsoft. There wasn't a lot of family people there. We could have what we called robust dialogue about the quality of somebody's idea or lack thereof. Then I started consulting in ranching operations, and it was amazing that the conversations ultimately would come back to, do you remember that time you popped the whip on my horse, he bucked me off, ran into the fence and broke his neck? I will never forgive you for that. And you're like, what? Whoa, we were talking about salaries here. How did we end up there? right? So not just organizations, but people's goals and expectations. And when you are dealing with family organizations, you are not just dealing, although it would be sure nice if you could, you are not just dealing with the facts and the figures and the here and the now. You're also dealing with, do you remember when mom gave you that thing and I thought it should have gone to me? So you have to recognize that these all are the things that are sort of, I like to say they're conspiring against you. And so you should go in, when you are trying to lead, and in this context, an agricultural operation, know that this is conspiring against you and think about it. You know, then, and not worse, that it's not bad enough. It's not worser. No, it's not bad enough that other people get in your way, but you get in your own way. It turns out. And you get in your own way a lot of ways. There's a great book, it's called Why CEOs Fail. And it's the 10 derailing traits of the world's most hated CEOs. And what it is guess what? These are very, very successful people. They have risen through the ranks to become a CEO, and yet they demonstrate these traits. You know, conceit, lack of empathy. You know, so there's a, you know, so there if you are demonstrating these things, you're getting in your own way. Here's another one, and I think Dallas sort of mentions it. It's, you know what? I get up in the morning and I think, go move the cows. Oh, horseback, and the weather sucks, but you know, they don't talk back. Or go talk to the accountant and the lawyer and figure out my succession plan. Cows. 20 below. Cows. Right? It's easier for most people to choose to work in the business. Right? To work on, well, you know, I'll do that. It's really important, but I'll do it tomorrow. Today I'm going to go fix the fence or whatever it is. Because these are much easier things to do, and they're things that are, so let me give you an example here. We're going to pretend, let's see, who do I get to pick on? Oh, okay, I'm going to pick on, I forget your name, I'm sorry, young lady. Tamara, that's right. So Tamara is, we have a tractor dealership, okay? And I own the dealership, and Tamara is the general manager of the parts department, okay? So that's her job. And Kelly here, Kelly's the general manager of the sales department, but Kelly's moved on. He's retired. He hasn't moved on, literally. He's retired. So we basically say, hey, this is great. You know, Tamara has got the parts department. It is just smoking. I mean, we make so much money over there, and everybody gets what they need. So I'm going to promote her to be in charge of both. I'm going to give her a raise. I'm going to make her in charge of both, you know, sales and parts. In the very first year of Tamara's existence in this new job, where does she spend 80% of her time? Come on, interactive. You guys are going to sleep. Where does she spend 80% of her time?
Sales. Parts.
Who thinks parts? Right. Not where should, but where does she spend? Yeah, the data shows that she spends 80% of her time in parts. Okay, now Eileen here was actually hired to fill Tamara's place in parts. So her quote job title is general manager of parts. How does she feel about her job? What do you think? Does she like her job? No, she doesn't. Why doesn't she like her job? Because it's not her job. Because Tamara, with all good intention, is spending all of that time, right, working in the business that she understands, as opposed to on the business, which is a lot more difficult. This concept in leadership is called scaling up, and that is exactly the definition of it. It is that when we scale up, we spend all of our time. When you become the ranch manager, where you should be spending your time on strategic issues and marketing, but you were so damn good at raising them cows, you ought to probably just keep doing that too, right? That's what we do. It is human nature that we spend the time coming from working on the place that we understand, as opposed to the place that we do not. So, you know, you get in your way, you fail to scale up. You are so comfortable in that job, okay? But here's the deal. If you are hired or own the role for, you know, your family or whatever it is to be the leader, you really have but one job. And this is to me is the real test of leadership. And it is that once you envision this new future that we talked about that won't exist without you, that you are able to transfer ownership of that vision to everybody else and then get out of the way. That your job is to do nothing but make sure that everyone else shares that vision, they understand where they're going, and then they are capable of making those decisions in whatever they're doing, parts, sales, the hay part, the farming part, the cattle production part of your ranch, whatever it is, that they are all pulling in the same direction because they understand where we're going. If you can do that, this is the practical statement of who hasn't heard, well, good managers work themselves, or leaders work themselves out of a job. This is, and you think, really? That's kind of stupid. What they're talking about is this, that eventually you are able to describe the future in such a concrete way that everyone who works for you internalizes that to the point that you either need to start thinking about something else, the next future, or, they don't need you anymore. That is the bar that we're shooting for. And another wonderful book, I will throw out lots of books and book titles, read them or not. Some of them are very funny. Ron Crossland has a book, it's called The Leader's Voice, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. It's so important for people in agriculture. Certainly our younger people, because agriculture is under attack. Agriculture is under attack from the mainstream media, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I lived in Seattle for 20 years, so. But it is under attack from mainstream media. It is under attack from the environmentalists. It is under attack from the so-called nutritionists. It is a very, very difficult place to be. And if we do not develop our own leader's voice, our ability to communicate why this is so important and who's going to feed the 9 billion people, if we do not develop those messages and our ability to communicate those things, we are in real trouble. So Ron has this great book. We'll talk about it a little bit, but one of my favorite quotes is, the biggest problem with leadership is the illusion that it actually occurred. So I want to share with you what I mean by that. Just before I left Microsoft, I was working, doing some special project. In fact, I had actually moved to Wyoming, but I was traveling back, and 2 or 3 weeks, every 6 weeks or something. And I was working for this vice president, and they spend tens of millions of dollars surveying the workforce. Are you happy? Are you not happy? Are you, all of this stuff. And do you understand the strategy? Is it a good strategy? And this VP's division had said, his numbers were very bad. Like 30% of the people said, we understand the strategy and it's a good one. And so to him, he was like, oh, I just haven't told them enough. So he organizes meetings and meetings and meetings. He spends 6 months and probably $1 million having meetings with, about 2,000 people work for him. And then they redid the test. They redid anybody want to guess what his numbers were? Less. Exactly. They were less. Because his assumption was that they just hadn't heard. And that if he just went out there and told them the illusion of leadership being what it is, then everything would be better. So millions of dollars, 6 months, and now the guy doesn't have a job. So illusion, you have to be clear, and this is why, I'm asking. My role here is in some ways a leadership role. I'm asking for confirmation. Does this make sense? Is this, resonating with you? What's missing? Because the only way to really know that that's happened is to test and then to see the behaviors change. So, Crossland, the biggest problem with leadership is the illusion that it occurred. That's how we get way on the wrong page. Kelly.
I think you could say that all by just risk. The original guy that starts a ranch has an incredible tolerance for risk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way in government. And then it just less and less and less and less. Pretty soon you get down to where I won't tolerate any risk. Companies do the same thing. And that's exactly it. I have nothing to hide behind, but I'm not going to risk anything either.
Right. And in fact, what they are in fact hiding, they're hiding behind the status quo. Right.
That's why government, we have such a dearth of leadership.
Right.
Because it is painful, but it's always, there has to be risk. And you always find when you deal with government people, it's not my fault. I didn't make a decision, but it's not my fault.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there are people in every, I would say, industry, you know, that it is really, it's not a government, non-government, it is this lack of leadership and vision where, you know, people stand up and say, this is the right thing. And I'm going to say that this is the right thing to do. And I'm going to try and convince you, and we're going to try and move in that direction. You know, I sometimes share this story. I have been working with a fairly large cattle operation in Montana for about 5 years now. You know, 6,500 head of cattle, about 230,000 acres. So it was a good, you know, good sized operation. And when it started, it was the patriarch had just moved out of the business. It sort of had some health issues and moved back. He says, forget this, I'm moving back to Texas, where the real people are. So he moves back to Texas and leaves his 4 children, who are in their upper 50s to 60s, in charge of the ranch. That they'd only worked in the business. None of them knew where the checking account was, right? Which, who thinks that's not common, right? It would probably be more common if they did know all about the business. So the 4 of them are like, you're in charge. Oh my gosh. So for like 6 months, they're attempting to make consensus four-person decisions. Disaster. So they bring me in and, you know, we sit down and we look at everything. And here was one of the problems. No one was in charge, but all 4 were drawing significant salaries. Because it turns out that before Dad, and they had just bought the company. They sort of bought out the previous generation, and we can talk about that all day. But they bought out, so now they're the owners, not Generation 1 where they were just employees. But the 4 of them are 100% owners of the company. And they, you know, they didn't know how to make decisions. So I came in and I said, look, you know, here's the answer. The answer is you have to elect a CEO. And that person has to have these responsibilities. And you have to elect a board of directors. And those people have these responsibilities. And by the way, shareholders are compensated like shareholders, meaning not a salary. So 3 of you have to stop drawing a salary from this business. That was a very, very, very hard message for them to hear. 4 months later, there was a CEO and a board. And 5 years later, that company has grown about 900%. I mean, that's 9 times in terms of profitability, revenue. So these are hard things, but if you stand up and say them, sometimes just standing up and saying them, everybody says, wow, I guess that really does make sense. But that is the act of leading. So why is it that we can't all just see the future? All right, so does anybody hear anything? I mean, besides me going blah, you know, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully it's not blah, blah, blah. But okay, anybody hear anything else? Oh, a little humming, right? So does anybody hear a very high-pitched noise? Okay, so somebody's standing out in the hall right now blowing a dog whistle. Okay? And sometimes actually people can hear it. Most of the time they cannot. So here's my question to you. Does it make it any less real that someone is blowing a dog whistle because you cannot hear it? Is it real? What do you think? Is it real? Yeah. Is there really sound being transmitted? Absolutely. Higher frequency than you're able to. Okay, it turns out there's nobody out there. But if there was, it would be real, right? Why can't you hear it? We're going to get the 30-second physiology or anatomy of the inner ear. You can't hear it because the way your inner ear works, got a little bone in there, and I always forget the name. It's got a funny name. Anybody know the name of the inner ear? Huh? That's the bone on the inner ear, the one that vibrates in the. So what happens is the sound waves come through, hit your little rubber eardrum. Your eardrum vibrates. That's transmitted into nerves, and your brain says, "Oh, Rick's yammering again." Okay, but this dog whistle blows at a higher frequency, so your eardrum can't vibrate fast enough. So physiologically, you are incapable of hearing it, but it's there. It's real. You are just not set up. Does everybody buy that? This is an important part of the analogy. I'm using an analogy here. Okay. Every one of us has a paradigm, an inner ear on the front of their brain. It's not physical, but it is in fact how, when data comes to you, sight, sound, analytic, Fox News, NBC, MSNBC, whatever it is, when data comes to you, it passes through that paradigm just like the sound passes through your eardrum. And what do you think you do with that data as it comes in? Why, you filter it. And you interpret it. Right? And one man's, well, that obviously means X, is somebody else's, that obviously means Y. Okay? So you as a leader, you have these paradigms and they're implicit. They call them implicit. You cannot ask somebody, what is your paradigm? Because there's a Heisenberg principle, right? You cannot observe something without modifying it. Right? You can't ask somebody, what is your hidden mental model? I don't know. Right? You can't ask them that, and they can't actually verbalize it. But they are common, they are unique, and they are hidden. So what you have to understand is when somebody says to, tomorrow I'm doing a talk on using some financials to actually make operational decisions. And the one I'm going to throw out is we're going to do heifer development, but we're going to breed them to Wagyu. And I can tell, do I see any funny looks in here? Oh, I see a few funny looks. I cannot tell you the swear words that were thrown at me that sort of went like, we're paying you some amount of money to bring us an idea like this. This is the stupidest thing we've ever heard. Why? Why is it stupid? They have a paradigm. Right? And they can't really articulate it, but it's something like they're smaller, they're funny looking, I might not be able to sell them, I guess it'll ruin my herd. And there's all sorts of things that go through, but what comes out is, ha! That's a stupid idea. So you, as a leader, have to recognize that everybody you're dealing with has a paradigm, right? That you have to figure out kind of what it is. So all sorts of research on business innovation. And this is what they say. They say the business innovation happens at the edges of the paradigms. When you can get someone to change their hidden sort of way of viewing the world, or articulate it in a way that you can realize, hey, well, that's not quite right, or that is right, but it creates an opportunity for us. And that is where innovation happens. So as a leader, part of your job is to challenge your own. And it's another reason why Dallas says bring outside people in onto your board. And so when you bring outside people into your business as advisors, I don't mean paying them or running on the business, but as advisors, what do? They bring a different mental model. The first ranch that hired me to be on their board of advisors probably thought they were somewhat nuts. Here was a guy who didn't know how long it took for a cow to gestate. I had no idea. 6 years ago, I had no idea, is it 9 months, 4 months? How long? Do you get 2 calves a year? I had no idea. But I had a fundamentally different set of paradigms, mental models, didn't I, than theirs. So again, when Dallas is talking about bringing people into a board, the worst person you can bring is your accountant. Any accountants in here? Whew. The worst person you can bring is your accountant for many reasons. One of which is they think exactly like you do. Because you told them how you think. Right? Okay, so, and this is one of my favorite, just if you get nothing out of this talk but this. It's a fantastic quote from a gentleman who's a Hungarian physicist, and he discovered vitamin C in 1954 or something. Albert St-George. And he said, discovery is seeing what everyone else sees, but thinking what no one else has thought. Just think about that for a minute. It's not like there was some new, wow, blue cows popped up one day. No. They saw what everybody else was seeing, but they thought about it in a way that was different than what anyone else had thought. So that's what leadership is about. When you're trying to formulate that vision, if you are stuck in the past, if you are stuck in a paradigm that you cannot get out of, you need to find somebody to help you. Okay? Make sense? So, these are our challenges of leadership. We have got a half hour to go through what does that mean. All right, so I promised you a way to think about. So we've set up, hopefully right now, you're going, wow, this is pretty interesting. Leadership is important. I get how it's different than management. I'd like to be better. What next? Is everybody there? Kind of what next? This is a very well tested. I probably used it for about 10 years and probably on hundreds and hundreds of leaders that basically say, if you take leadership and we say the leadership with a big L, it's too amorphous. We don't really know what that means. If you break it down into these 4 quadrants, you can actually make it much more tangible. And the 4 quadrants are business leadership. So sometimes we think about that as strategy. We think about that as not the what we're doing, and not even really the how, but the why. Why we're doing it, and does that break, are there molds for us to change? Small molds or big molds. And so the bigger picture is thinking. Probably one of my favorite books on this topic is a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And it is this, and for any of you in the cattle business, or even the commodities business, it's very sad, because it starts off by talking about the red ocean, which is where all of us sit there and feed on the one fish, and there's sharks, and and everybody's here, and it's a commodity business. You're a price taker business, and it's kind of not a fun deal. And then they talk about the blue ocean is, why don't you just swim away a little bit and find some blue water that isn't full of everybody else? And so then it talks about how to develop these strategies, even, interestingly enough, even in commodity businesses, for new strategies. So business leadership, organization. So that's very different than organizational leadership. What do you guys think that means? Anybody? Bueller? Come on, organizational. People. Are you a good boss? Do people want to, do you have people doing the right, anybody read Good to Great? Not one of my favorite books, but he has a great analogy, which is, do you have the right people in the right seats on the bus? Right? Right people, right seats. So that's organizational leadership. Operational leadership is, how do we get better at what we do? Right? It is really focusing on the operation, the production of what we do. And then finally, individual leadership. I used to say this is anyone listening. It is the set of skills that you as an individual leader develop. This is where we talk about your leadership voice, your vision, your communication skills, those kinds of things. And it is how you, and interestingly enough, of course, individual leadership then influences how good you are at all those others, doesn't it? It also, one of my favorite sort of metrics for an individual leader is, it's what we call coattails. When you leave to go to another ranch, how many people are saying, take me with you? Or when you go to that other ranch, when a bunch of people miraculously over the next 6 months, the good ones anyway, end up working at your new ranch. It's a very good metric of how much of a leader are you that people will follow you. Economically, they will follow you because it means a job and a move and those kinds of things. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to just spend the next 20 minutes just kind of drilling down on some of these so that you get a sense of what does each of them mean, okay? Anybody have any questions on this? The point of this framework is that you will be able to assess. You can't say, I want to be a better leader. But you can look at your business today and say, you know what we really need? What we really need is better strategy. So I am going to focus really on being a better business leader, right? And then I'm going to have other people in the organization be a good organizational leader and production leader, and and I'm going to turn it over to my son, who is going to be, he can run the darn cattle well enough while I work on these other things. So, okay. Business leadership. Where are we going? So what kind of, push the button. How many of you have a relatively current opportunity analysis for your business? Where you stepped back and said, you know, what is it that everybody else is doing? What are our goals for margin or percent of the market or scale or whatever those things are? And that from that, we've identified some new product lines. We have some new seeds or some different seeds or some new lineages if we're a seed stock producer for animals. You know, how many of you have an active, relatively update plan for what your opportunities look like for your business? Yeah, I mean, almost nobody does. But that is one of the primary roles of a business leader. Because either you look out 1 or 2 years and are thinking about what does that mean for us. Because I always ask the question, if not you, who? Who in your organization, and your organization, I know it's a big word for you, your wife, and your 2 kids. I mean, I get that. But who in that group of people, if not you, is actually thinking out 2 years? So that's one part of being a business leader. Who are your customers? Who are your customers? Very, very interesting question in the beef industry. Sometimes we get lulled into thinking as a cow-calf operator that our customer is the next guy down the line, the feedlot operator, the backgrounder, the guy who's going to take them from 600 to 900 pounds. And so we say, well, what do they want? They want light, or they want big, or they want this, or they want that. But we forget that it's entirely possible that our end customer is, in fact, the consumer. And what do they want? And so, you can convince yourself that somebody is your customer, and what does that segmentation look like, and you could be really missing the mark. Okay? This is where when like the USDA comes in and says, think about value add, like the value add programs, what they're really saying is think about different customers, right? Think about a different, you think, take cow, breed cow, make calf older, send calf down the line, right? That's what we think, rinse and repeat. But that isn't necessarily all there is in that space. So being a business leader, do you understand the industry moves and the impacts? Who knows what happened in the feedlot industry 1 week ago? Anybody know? A plant closed. Markets dropped. You're losing about 6 cents a calf. Do you understand why? Do you understand, are they going to restock? Are they going to restart? Is there capacity? Do you understand the capacity at all the other plants? And why, by the way, that 6 cents drop was irrational, because the other plants had more than enough capacity to pick them up, but it's a good way to take money from the producer. So is that a short-term differentiation or long-term? You as the business leader have to know these things. You also have to think about business models, and I have done 4-hour talks on business models. I'm going to give you the 2-minute condensed version. What does Walmart sell? What is their value? What's that? So everything is a very common answer. Walmart sells everything. But if you would ask Walmart executives, and if you ever have a chance to fly out to Bentonville, Arkansas, it's not very impressive. It's a little bitty town. So I spent time with Walmart executives. If you ask them what they sell, they say, we sell value. We sell price. Right? The reason you shop here is because it's cheaper. It isn't because it's better. It isn't even because you can get everything, although you kind of can. It's because it's cheaper. So interestingly enough, if you accept that that's what you sell, then you would build an entire business model around being cheaper than everybody else. And guess why Walmart is the largest retailer on the planet? Because their business model is about selling everything cheaper. When the executives of Walmart fly out to Seattle to visit us, they fly coach. If they want first class, they pay for it out of their pocket. And they sleep, honest to God, 2 in a room. Chief financial officers of one of the largest companies on the planet. He wants his own room, he can pay 50% of it, and the other person can pay 50% of it. Because the company says, we're going to pay for 1 room because there's 2 beds in there, doggone it. Right? Everything that they do is built around price. Southwest Airlines. Everybody knows Southwest Airlines. By the way, there's a wonderful book. It's called Value Migration. And it was written by a guy, published by Harvard Business Press, about 1993. And it is still as good today as it was back then. It's probably my favorite book on business models. Southwest Airlines. What does Southwest Airlines sell? Somebody, cheap price, right? You're going, hey, that Walmart thing again. Actually, interestingly enough, Southwest Airlines sells convenience. And this is why they sell convenience. If you are in Seattle and want to go to Albuquerque, you can get on a Southwest Airlines flight and go from Seattle to Albuquerque. If you want to go United, you end up in Denver first. Now, nowhere did I say I wanted to go to Denver. I had any interest in being in Colorado at all. Oh, I could go Delta and I could end up in Salt Lake first. So, Delta, United, all of those airlines have a model, what's called hub and spoke. Who hasn't heard of the hub? Where's the hub of United? Denver, Chicago. They're so big they got to have 2 hubs. Okay? Delta. Salt Lake and Memphis, and now even, they have like 3 since they bought Northwest Airlines. Okay, so that's that model. Where's Southwest Hub? Anybody? They don't have one. Southwest Airlines flies point to point. Okay, now if you were going to fly, this is a very interesting business model. If you're going to fly, why does they do this? Because when you fly from here to here, if the plane breaks down, all the parts are here, all the mechanics are here, they can put you on another plane and you can go to here. Now, if you are Southwest Airlines and you fly from here to here, doesn't that mean you got to have parts and at all of these places because you have no place to bring them back to? So guess what? Their entire business model. How many types of planes does Southwest Airlines fly? One. 737. Why? Every part in every airport. Interchangeable pilots. Right? These guys can't fly anymore because they're late. Well, you just stick the guys on that are in San Antonio and they can get on that. They don't have to worry about, well, are they trained to fly the 757, the 747 stretch, the da-da-da-da? No. So, anybody want to guess what the only U.S. airline that has been profitable every year for the last 5 years is? Southwest. Billions of dollars in shareholder profit created by a thoughtful business model. We need to do this in the agricultural space. We fall into, I sell to you, you sell to them. That's what we do. We have to think about what other business models are there. Anybody want to just guess? I'm going to throw out business models in the beef production space. 3 or less. Anybody? 3 or less. Cow-calf, feeder, stalker. Okay, 5 or less, because you might say, oh, and the guy who, the packer. Maybe you get seed, stock, 5. 10 or less. Anybody think there's more than 5, less than 10? Oh, you guys aren't even going to raise your hand, so I'm going to tell you the answer. There is no answer, but I can articulate 26 different business models. And if you can't name them, then you're not thinking hard enough about what business you ought to be in. Okay? So that's about being a business leader. We talked about mental models there. Organizational leadership. So maybe you have a good business model, you have good management, but you have a challenge with keeping, retaining, hiring the best employees, whatever that is. So I want you to think about organizational leadership. One of the things that we talk about is creating organizational capacity. This is a really simple measure. Can you do more today than you could have a year ago? With the same set of people. I didn't say the same people, because sometimes you've got somebody who doesn't fit and they have to leave and somebody else comes in. But it's kind of the same number. Can you do more? If you can, you have increased your organizational capacity. It is as simple. And if you can't, you really have to think about, what are we doing? Are we training these people? Do we have the right people? Am I putting them in the right seat on the bus? So that is one of the roles of an organizational leader, is to think about, do we have capacity? Are we increasing capacity? And we talked about this a little earlier. If you are the visionary leader, your job is then to empower them to make the decisions to get where they need to go. Right? If they feel, so here's my, I have to tell you this example because it's very funny. Same ranch up in Montana. We're going to go out and my God, they start early. Like, be on your horse saddled by the crack of dawn. Because as soon as light comes up, we're going to go gather. We're going to gather and brand 600 calves a day. This is a lot of calves. So we start early. Now, we go up the day before and we're going to put up some, and this is old school, like literal wagon out there, tents, that whole deal. But we get to bring, newfangled stuff. We're going to bring some panels for a working pen to hold 600 pair, by the way. So you bring them all up and they pull up the pickups and they're about to unload them. And I grab the CEO and I say, this would be an interesting test. What do you think would happen if you and I got on our horses and rode up on the hill there and pretended to be looking at something, and you just told them, hey, set up them panels, and I'll be back in a half hour. I said, what do you think would happen? He says, well, they'd set the panels up. Now, this guy has got some of the top hands around. Every one of them could set these things up in their sleep. I said, okay, well, let's do that. Okay. So he rides over and he says, you guys set up them panels, and Rick and I are going to go up here and we'll be back in a half hour. It was like deer in the headlights. I mean, like every one of these people standing there, the eyes got this big. Why? Why? What is the normal way in which these panels get set up on this ranch? No, but down there, and then no, don't put that there. The gate got to be cut here. How many times do I have to tell you? We're cutting them out here. Then we got an alley here to put the sick ones and the dead and the small ones, and right? That's exactly how it's done. Anybody experienced that before? Who hasn't worked for that guy? Who doesn't have a father, like that in many cases? So we get on our horses, we ride up, and we sit up there. And 10 minutes goes by, and not a panel has come off the truck. Not one panel. And I'm going to ride down there, I'm whipping and spurring. And I'm like, no. So we sit there for 30 minutes and no panel. And now, how hot is he? I mean, I'm not paying them sons of bucks for 30 minutes. They're not, and that's how hot he is. I'm like, no, this is an opportunity. So we go down there and we have this conversation. And I'm like, we're going to have a conversation about the business. And he's like, no, we got to do 600 calves. No, we're going to have this conversation about the business. And it is exactly this. They were not empowered. They had never been empowered. And every one of them, I said, look, if you were on your own, they're like, should have been done after 10 minutes. But why didn't you do it? Because we didn't know what Jim wanted. Yeah. So it is about what the boss wanted, not what the right thing to do was. Did everybody catch that? It wasn't what is the right thing to do. It was, I didn't know what he wanted. Okay, so think about that. Your job is not to make them do what you want, because when you are not there, they won't. They really won't do it. So empower the organization. We're just kind of get through some of these things. I'm not going to talk about that. Creates transparent decision-making structures. Again, if you sort of went to Dallas's talk, probably one of the most important things to empower people is they know what decisions are theirs, and they know what decisions aren't theirs. And there's clarity. Somebody over there had said clarity. There's clarity of who is responsible for ordering mineral, and who is responsible for deciding the ration in the feedlot. And literally, when you start this, guess what the answer is? The CEO. The CEO is responsible for deciding what feedlots we're going to use, for negotiating those, for figuring out our leases, for figuring out our rations, for figuring out our rotational schedule on 23 or 230,000 acres. What was everybody else doing? Were they contributing to any of these interesting discussions and decisions? No. They were collecting a paycheck and doing what the CEO said. And did the CEO have any capacity himself to then start thinking about strategies, blue oceans and other? Did he have any capacity for that? No. He's working 90 hours a week. No. So, you see how this is all tying in. You have to create that organizational capacity. You have to allow them, create the decision-making structure so they know what they can and cannot, in fact, do. I'm only going to talk a second about this because okay, truth be told, when I put this chart up, oh, I got to click a lot of buttons. When I put this chart up and I told you what they were, who would have said you spend most of your time, maybe 90% or more, in operational leadership? You guys are not the hand-raising kind. Everybody would have said that, because just like Tamara would have went and run the parts department, that's what you do. That's what you, and you've been really good at it, and you've been successful, and it's been drilled into you that this is what we do. We move the cows on the day we move the cows. We cut the seed on the day we cut. Whatever it is, that's what you focus on, right? So we're not going to spend a lot of time on production leadership, because you guys will do that on your own. But it is, the one thing that you probably don't do is, are you clear why somebody will buy from you and not the other guy? If you cannot tell your people in production the 3 things that we are about, we're about quality and relationships and uniqueness. Those might be the 3 things we're about. Or we're about X, Y, and whatever they are. If you can't say that and they can't say it, I challenge you to go back to people who work for you and say, what are the 3 things that we're about? They'll be like, cheap, do what we're told, and be on time. I mean, you know, I guess, or they may have something a little better, but it probably won't be the 3 things that you think you're about. So that's a big part of what, you know, production leadership is. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because I want to have a few minutes for individual leadership. This is probably the one where you guys have all shown an interest in improving yourself, in being better leaders by attending this conference and coming to listen to me blather on. I want you to think about why people listen to you. And not just your customers, and not your employees, your spouse or anything, but it is in fact why anybody would listen to you. And this comes from Crossland's Leader's Voice. The first thing is, you have to deliver something that is authentic. We know, your employees know, your family knows, the public knows when you are not authentic. Okay? And so, you know, the first thing is, when you are talking, you have to deliver something that comes from deeply held values and themes. This is so important. If you are inconsistent, if you say one thing and behave another way, they will smell it. And they will not believe you anymore because you are not consistent. So your message has to be delivered from a core authentic place. If you want to talk about feeding 9 billion people, I am all ears. How in the hell are we going to do that? How are we going to do that in 10 years? How are we going to feed 9 billion people? How are we going to feed 9 billion people with proteins? We don't even know how to do it with grains, but what are we going to do with proteins? What proteins are they going to eat? Like you know what? We would love, it'd be fine if we didn't have to give growth hormones to our cattle in the feedlot. That'd be just fine. You want to know what the cost of beef is without those? It's about 2.5 times what it is today. You want to know, Mr. Environmentalist friend of mine, how many more cattle we have to keep producing methane? We have to double the number of live cattle that we have. Every one of them farting. Right? Let's have those conversations, but they need to be authentic and core. They also need, so think about this. When you lead, and this is wonderful, when you're talking to people, your employees, your family, you need to lead with facts, emotions, and symbols. This is a fantastic, the book is great, but this is so important. Think about this. Because facts create credibility. Now, you're allowed to your own opinion, but you're not allowed to your own facts. Right? Okay. So facts create credibility. Emotion creates connection. And symbols create memorabilia. So think about this talk this morning. Have I produced facts? There's a few of them in there, sprinkled in. Have I had emotion? I'm passionate about things, not passionate about things. Humor, right? About creating those. It's not by chance, folks, because this is what you need to do to be a leader. You need to create those connections. Symbols, jokes. You may not remember what Rick was talking about, but you remember the guy or the gal who ran the parts department always goes back to the parts department, right? Symbols and stories create impressions, okay? And so when you are this leader, when you are looking at individual leadership, when you are thinking about how you can be this better leader, you have to deliver from the core, lead with facts and emotions, and then this is the classic one. If you can remember not to do these things, you will be all right. And they're called the 4 fatal assumptions. The first one is that people understood. Don't assume that they understood. And so you have to check quite a bit. Particularly when you're talking about a new topic to your employees or your family or your brothers and sisters, when you're trying to convince them that maybe you should do something different or something incremental. Don't assume that they understood, first of all, what you're talking about. Then don't assume that they agree. We have this notion of passive aggressiveness in our country. Some people are really good at it. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then walk up, what the hell? Anybody ever had that experience? Passive. So don't assume that they agreed. So as a leader, you have to come back often and say, well, no, really, how could this go horribly wrong? What did I miss? So then don't assume that they cared. Because you could really be passionate about this, and they're going to be like, that's like $72 a profit one way or the other. That didn't really float my boat. Right? So don't assume that they cared. And then finally, don't assume, and this is probably the biggest one, is once you're like, yes, I've told them and they understood and they cared and we're all on the same page, don't assume that they know what they're supposed to do with what you just told them. Right? A lot of times they're like, yes, 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 and they walk out and they go, were they going to do that? Was I supposed to do that? So don't assume. So these are the 4 fatal assumptions of individual leadership. The last thing that I will leave you with in terms of as you're thinking about your individual leadership is stress, intentionality. You guys have all heard the stories, so a rancher, he has horrible hay quality. He buys crappy hay, has weeds in his own fields because of it. Doesn't really care about nutrition of his animal very much. He buys the this and that from the sale barn and he puts them all together. And at the end of the year, he looks at it and he finds out he loses like $100,000. And he's like, I'm just the worst rancher on the planet. I'm going to get better. So the next year, he does the same thing. The next year, he still buys the crappy hay and isn't that everything's the same. But cattle are $1.60 a pound now. He makes $100,000 this year. And you know what he says? I am the best rancher on the planet. Because he made money. Is he the best rancher on the planet? Did he do anything differently? Right? That's not being intentional. You have to be intentional when you're looking at these things. Don't let the market describe to you whether you were making good or bad decisions. Right? You need to be intentional about the decisions you make and why you make them, and then you need to follow through on them. All right. Button. I'm going to go through this because I want to get to, this is probably the last slide we'll touch on. This is really the reason that you're doing this, folks. This is really the reason that you are trying to lead. And this is from a gentleman named, researcher named John Cotter, who has a book. It's from a book called Leading Change. And that's the point, right? If you accept my definition of leadership, which is that you are creating a future that wouldn't exist without you, okay, then you have to create all of these things. You have to create a reason, an understanding of the reason that we're doing this. You have to have a shared vision of what the future looks like, okay? You have to have a plan for how we're going to get there, and then you have to have the skills to execute on this plan. And Cotter made this really simple, little grid, and it said, look, if you don't have, if it is not clear why you're doing this, but you have a shared vision of, okay, we don't know why we're doing it, but this is the change we're making, and we have a plan, and we have the skills. What he says is that you might get it done. It's a crapshoot. Because you're really not sure of the reason, so it might, in fact, achieve the reason that you can't articulate, or it might not, but you'll do something. Sometimes it's called the, well, we'll do something, the forward motion line. The second one is, what if we all are clear, anybody been in this one, we're clear about the reason. Everybody knows this is important. We might lose our ranch, we might, whatever it is. The reason is clear, but we have no agreement on which path to take. We have no shared vision, but we have 2 plans and 2 sets of skills. This is the resentment path. Does anybody say, why is it resentment? Because we all get that something's really gotta happen, and we are pulling in 2 different directions. So as a leader, you have to recognize the shared vision. Similarly with plan, again, if you have this notion of reason and shared vision, but you don't have a plan, this is the chaos scenario, right? Everybody's like, yes, it's important. We even know where we're going. And then we have duplication of effort, and we have everybody going off and doing these crazy things. So that is the chaos scenario. The last one is, if we have all these other things, but we don't realize we don't have the skills to pull this off. And Cotter calls that the waste scenario. That is, we've done all of this work, and we've tried to get through it, and in fact, we are just not going to be successful. Only when you as a leader ensure through business leadership, through individual leadership, through product or production leadership, through organizational leadership, only when you, through those dimensions, make sure that the reason is clear, the vision is clear, the plan is clear, that we have the skills in place, that we have a very strong sense of success.